Welcome to the Lazy but Smart Sinhala podcast. Learn to speak good enough Sinhala with a minimum needed effort.
Hello folks, this is Dilshan and welcome to session 4 of the Lazy but Smart Sinhala podcast. I think it's been a week, maybe a little more than a week since I released those last 3 sessions in one go, and I have to thank you for the encouragement that has been pouring in. It's been fantastic. Thanks for all the comments that you left on my blog. You know who you are, Mary Jane, Ingrid, Wendy. Thanks so much. It's very, very encouraging. Thanks for the awesome feedback and suggestions about the podcast through emails from guys like Narayanan, Dino, Larry, Dan, and Shaggy. Thanks also to Yuli and Sajantan for sharing it on Google Plus and Facebook and whatever you kids are up to these days. But anyway, thank you so much for the wonderful, wonderful words. And this has really prompted me to do better with each session, which is what brings me to my next point. I will be introducing one slight modification. Hopefully, you'll see it as an improvement to this audio tutorial, because I listened to the previous one and I kind of got the feeling that perhaps I could have done a better job of separating the sections so that you know which section you are in. So what I've done starting from this session is to have that lovely, charming female voice that you hear at the beginning and at the end to announce each section, so you'll have a clear idea of which part of the session we are in. On a separate topic, I see that some of you, actually most of you, are listening to my podcast through iTunes, either through your iPhone or iPad devices. And for those of you, please remember to subscribe to the podcast. This will help both you and me. It'll help you because it gives you updates, I think, literally seconds after I release it. So you'll never have to keep checking, but you'll just be notified automatically. And at the same time, it helps iTunes understand that my audience is, well, serious about following my show and sort of helps me with the rankings in iTunes. So it's a win-win. In this session, you'll learn how to introduce yourself in Sinhala. This is a good way to follow up on the previous audio tutorial where I showed you how to greet someone in Sinhala when you meet them for the first time. And so it is only natural that the next step would be where you start speaking about yourself and introducing yourself. Okay, then let's go right into the feature segment, and I'll talk to you right after. Enjoy.
Feature segment.
All right, before we start, perhaps it's best if I do a quick recap of what we covered in the previous tutorial. We started off by looking at some basic personal pronouns. You know that I is mama, informal you is oya, and he or she was ea. We also saw a typical informal greeting in Sinhala, which was to ask the equivalent of how are you, and I showed you 2 ways of asking this. One was the easy way, and the other one was what I called the super easy way. The easy way was to ask oya kohomada, which means how are you, and the super easy way was just to ask kohomada, which means how. I then showed you how to respond to such a greeting by saying the equivalent of I am fine. And once again, I gave you 2 options. One was the easy way, which was to say mama honding innawa, which means I am fine. And the super easy way, which was to say honding innawa, which is the equivalent of saying fine. And in the last section, I showed you a traditional formal greeting in Sinhala, which was are you bowan? And I told you that this is not used very often in day-to-day conversation, but you'll be most likely greeted by hotel staff or airline staff, typically in a touristic kind of area with are you bowan? So at least it's good for you to know how to respond to it. And as you remember, the right response was also Ayubowan. Good. Now, what are we going to cover in today's session? We will start with some basic possessives of some of the pronouns that we just saw. For example, the possessive of I is my. The possessive of informal you is informal your. And the possessive of he or she will be his or her. And we will learn the Sinhala words for each of these possessives. In section 2, I'll show you 2 ways to introduce yourself. Method 1 will be to say, my name is, and your name. And method 2 will be to say, I am, and your name. In section 3, I'll show you how you can ask someone their name when you meet them for the first time. And in section 4, I'll teach you how to say something nice and polite, which is the word thank you in Sinhala. Let's start.
Section 1.
Basic possessives of the pronouns that we saw. Let's start with informal your. We saw that informal you is oya. Informal your, on the other hand, is oyage. Oyage. You'll notice that all we've done is we've added an indicator ge to the end of the word oya and made it oyage. And this is very typical in Sinhala. To indicate the possessive form of a living thing, we would add ge to the end of the word. For example, and keep in mind, you don't need to remember these words because we'll cover them in a later session for sure. But for now, I'm just going to use them as an example. The Sinhala word for the man is miniha. And to say the man's, meaning belonging to, or the possessive form, we would say miniha ge. We just added ge to miniha to say miniha ge. Same way, let's take another living thing like a dog, for example. The dog in Sinhala is balla. And to say the dogs, we would just add ge to the end to say balla ge. Balla ge. So, going back to what we saw, informal you is oya and informal yo is oyage. In the same way, you know that he or she in Sinhala is ea. And to say his or her, we just add the indicator ge to the end to say eage. Eage. So far, so good. But now we're going to look at how to say my. And now you need to wake up because this is an exception to the rule and we're heading into a pitfall. Using the logic that we saw before, you would think that to say my, we'd go with the personal pronoun first, which is mama, which means I, and we add the indicator ge to the word mama in order to say mama ge. But this is not correct. The correct word is not too far away. That word is mage. Mage. So let me quickly summarize. Informal yo is oyage. His or her is eage. And my is mage.
Section 2.
2 ways to introduce yourself. Method 1, as I told you, will be to say my name is. Now I'm going to use my name, Dilshan, but of course when you're practicing it you need to use your name. This I don't need to tell you. So let's learn how to say my name is Dilshan. The singular word for name is nama. Nama. It rhymes very closely to the word mama, which means I, but this one starts with na, so it's nama. The word for my, as we just saw, is mage. So mage nama means my name. As easy as that. In the previous audio tutorial, we saw a lazy but smart Sinhala tip where I told you that the words am, are, and is are usually implied in Sinhala sentences, and therefore we do not use an equivalent for these words. So going back to the name, my name is Dilshan, we know that is not necessary. So the sentence that we're trying to create here is my name Dilshan. So my name is Mage nama, Dilshan is Dilshan. So to say my name is Dilshan, we would say Mage nama Dilshan. Do you see how easy that is? So now we can even replace Mage with the other possessives that we saw. So if Mage nama Dilshan means my name is Dilshan, Oyage nama Dilshan would mean your name is Dilshan, Eage nama Dilshan would mean his or her name is Dilshan. Actually, in Sinhala, there is a feminine version of my name, which is Dilshani, but that's not relevant here. Just remember that my name is Dilshan is Mage nama Dilshan. So if your name is Ricky, you'd say Mage nama Ricky. Now let's go to method 2 of introducing yourself. Let's learn how to say I am Dilshan. This is super easy. Going back to that tip that we just talked about, the word am is implied in sentences, so therefore we don't need to use an equivalent for the word am. So when we're creating the sentence I am Dilshan, essentially we're trying to create a sentence that reads I Dilshan. Now from the previous audio tutorial, you know that I in Sinhala is Mama and Dilshan will be Dilshan. So I am Dilshan in Sinhala is Mama Dilshan. Now let's use the other personal pronouns instead of Mama. For example, Oya Dilshan would be you are Dilshan, or Ea Dilshan would be he or she is Dilshan.
Section 3.
Asking someone their name. We're going to learn how to ask what is your name. In the previous audio tutorial, we learned that how are you in Sinhala is Oya Kohomada. And remember that this literally read you how. The same way, if we're going to ask what is your name, we have to create a sentence that literally reads your name what. Your is Oyage. Name, as you saw in the previous section, is Nama. So your name would be Oyage Nama. And now the only thing that you don't know in this sentence is the Sinhala word for what. And I'll give it to you. It's a bit longer, but it's not that difficult and you don't need to memorize it because I will use it very often and you'll just remember it through repetition. The Sinhala word for what is Mokakda. 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 So if we're going to create a sentence that literally reads your name what and your name is Oyage and what is Mokakda, we will put them together and say Oyage nama Mokakda, which is what is your name? Oyage nama Mokakda. Got it? Now let's use the other possessives that we saw instead of Oyage. For example, if you wanted to ask what is his or her name, you will replace Oyage with Eage and you'll ask Eage nama Mokakda. Eage nama Mokakda. And well, this doesn't make much practical sense, but just for example's sake, if you wanted to ask what is my name, you would say Mage nama Mokakda. Mage nama Mokakda. But if you're going around asking people what your name is, maybe you have bigger problems than wanting to learn Sinhala at that point.
Section 4.
Learning to say thank you in Sinhala. The Sinhala word for thank you is Istuti. Istuti. Let's use Istuti in a practical sense. In the previous audio tutorial, we learned that when someone asks you how are you, which in Sinhala is Oya kohomada, the correct response would be Mama honding innawa or honding innawa, which means I am fine. Now we can add the word thank you to the end of these two sentences to sound a little more polite. So, if someone asks you Oya kohomada, you could say Mama honding innawa istuti, or you can just say honding innawa istuti. And that's all the new things you're going to learn in this session.
And now, a recap of this audio tutorial.
Let's quickly recap. We started off by looking at some basic possessives of the pronouns we saw. We saw that informal yo is oyage, his or her is eage, and my, which didn't follow the same rule, is mage. Then in section 2, we saw two ways how you could introduce yourself. The first method was to say my name is, and we learned how to say my name is Dilshan, and this was Mage nama Dilshan. We then replaced mage with other possessives such as oyage nama Dilshan, which means your name is Dilshan, or eage nama Dilshan, which means his or her name is Dilshan. And then we went on to method 2 to introduce yourself, and this was just to say I am Dilshan, and this was Mama Dilshan. We then replaced Mama with different personal pronouns, and we said Oya Dilshan, which means you are Dilshan, or Ea Dilshan, which means he or she is Dilshan. In section 3, we learned how to ask what is your name, and we saw that we had to create a sentence that literally read your name what, and we created the sentence Oyage nama mokakda, where the word mokakda means what. We then replaced oyage with the other possessives, and we asked eage nama mokakda, which means what is his or her name, and mage nama mokakda, which means what is my name. And in the last section, I taught you how to be a little more polite by saying thank you. The Sinhala word was istuti, and we used that in order to say mama honding innawa istuti, which means I am fine, thank you, or honding innawa istuti, which means fine, thank you.
Sample dialogue.
Alright, now let's look at a simple dialogue between you and someone familiar to you. Let's say it's with me. So, you meet me and you ask, Kohomada? Or, Oya Kohomada? I'm going to reply, Honding innawa istuti. Or, Mama honding innawa istuti. You can ask me my name, which is Oyage nama mokakda. And I would say, Mage nama Dilshan. Or I can even say, Mama Dilshan. And then if I ask you, Oyage nama mokakda, I'm going to assume your name is Ricky, and so you can say, Mage nama Ricky, or Mama Ricky. Let's assume that I have a friend called Anya, and you want to know what her name is. So you'll ask me, Eage nama mokakda. What is his or her name? In this case, what is her name? And I would say, Eage nama Anya, which means her name is Anya. Or I can say, Ea Anya, which means she is Anya. And let's assume that you and we meet 1 week later, and you want to ask me, how is Anya? You would ask, Anya kohomada? To which I will reply, Anya honding innawa istuti.
Questions and answers.
Alright, let me ask you some quick questions now. So tell me, what do the following words mean? Oyage, informal yo, eage, his or her, Mokakda. What? Next question. How would you say the following words in Sinhala? My. Mage. Thank you. Istuti. Name. Nama. Question 3. How would you ask someone their name? You would want to ask, what is your name? Oyage nama mokakda. How would you introduce yourself? Assume that your name is Pat. There are two ways you could introduce yourself. Either you would say, my name is Pat, or I am Pat. Let's start with, my name is Pat. Mage nama Pat. Now, how would you say, I am Pat? Mama Pat. And for your last question, how would you ask the following questions about a person named Jason? How is Jason? Jason kohomada? Jason is fine. Jason hunding innawa? Jason is fine, thank you. Jason hunding innawa? Istuti. So there you go. That's the end of session 4. Learning to introduce yourself in Sinhala. Hope you have a better idea of it now. Make sure you head back to my blog to find the show notes of this session. You'll find a summary of all the main words and the phrases that we used here. You can find it at lazybutsmartsinhala.com/session 4, the number 4. And on that same page, feel free to leave your comments or any questions that you have, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Remember to subscribe on iTunes, and thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
That was the Lazy but Smart Sinhala podcast. www.lazybutsmartsinhala.com. Goodbye.